I never liked hitchhiking stories. I'm a truck driver transporting merchandise from warehouses to the shops, or more likely to another warehouse. It's a pretty monotonous job. There's not really much that you're doing aside from just driving. I spend most of my time either listening to the radio or whatever podcast I have on. That's not to say that anyone can do what I do. Driving a truck is different from driving a car. That's why you've got to have a license for it. But it's also about endurance. Sitting on your ass all day does sound really fun, but after a while you become sore and uncomfortable from the inactivity. And if you adjust your seat roll, then your back gets out of whack for the days afterwards. There's also the fact that you're still driving for hours at a time, which is pretty draining. Making sure to take breaks so that you don't kill the other road users. Usually trips to and from the warehouse take a whole day, which means I might find myself driving home at night on the highway. And whenever I bring this up to one of my non-truck driver friends, their first thoughts is to ask me about hitchhikers. I said, I never liked hitchhiking stories. Usually, if the stories come from the driver, it's all about ghosts and mysterious women who turn out to be dead all along, etc. But if it isn't from the hitchhiker's perspective, all a truck driver can be is either a secret murderer, hunting their next victim, or a friendly face who helps out in the time of crisis, never to be heard of again. I guess that one goes to show that we can never really know the full story. We can poke and prod for information, but we're all left with just a small sliver of a life. A brief interaction, a helping hand, and then would never see each other again. I've taken a few hitchhikers from the side of the highway, just people who needed to get to the nearest town or whatever. They're usually pretty quiet, and you could usually tell whether it's from general awkwardness at the whole arrangement or whether they're just really tired. They've never given me any hassle before, and they're usually pretty respectful, trying not to intrude into my space. I don't mind giving them a lift. They're just people who need help, but I won't say that it's not a weight off my shoulders when they finally get out onto the street or another stretch of road off the highway. However, there was this one time that was different from the rest of my hitchhiking experiences. It was a couple of years ago, 2008 maybe. I was delivering some furniture from Kansas City to a storage warehouse for a home outlet center, or something like that. It was a 9 to 10 hour drive, but nothing I had never done before. 3 hours into my drive, I noticed this one kid on the side of the road signaling me. They couldn't have been more than 17, 20 years old. They were tall with short, cropped black hair and wearing a leather jacket with a bunch of enamel pins stuck to it. What was strangest about this person was the silver tin bucket they were carrying with them. It had a lid made of the same metal as the rest of the bucket on it, so I couldn't see what's inside. I pulled up next to them and asked if they were alright, and they told me that their name was Jules, and that they needed a lift to Story City. Luckily, it was on my route and I could spare a couple of minutes dropping this kid off, so I let them tag along. Fairly standard affair for hitchhiking. We drove for a couple of miles before I started asking questions, just trying to liven the mood. Some, if most, hitchhikers usually aren't in the mood for talking, but Jules was an absolute chatterbox, answering every one of my questions in endless detail. I think they said that they were studying at a university somewhere, but honestly, they said so much. All of the details seemed to leak out of my head to make way for more of their ramblings. Okay, I know that makes it sound like they were really annoying, but I never got tired of their talking. It was a nice break from the monotony and isolation of a regular delivery trip. However, the one thing they never seemed to mention was the bucket that was now resting between their legs. I snuck glances at it from time to time, whenever there was a long stretch of road with no cars ahead. It reflected a small amount of orange light from the occasional street lamp. However, there was a certain simmer, a weird gleam that the bucket gave off without any glow, like it was blinding me without shining in my face. I don't look much, but when I did, my eyes strained themselves instinctively, and when I looked back at the road, its outline seemed to burn into my retinas, only to fade away the next time I blinked. I tried asking about it, asked why they had the bucket, why would they need it? They said it was fishing supplies, but I never heard any lures rattling around or the wet slapping of bait. I couldn't make out any sound from the bucket. It could have been empty for all I knew. I dropped the subject quickly and just kept on driving. Eventually, I had to stop for a while to get some gas, food, and a break. I wasn't planning on turning in for the night and knew that there was a 2-star hotel called Comfort Inn down at where I was dropping them off. But still, like my boss keeps forgetting, a man's gotta eat. There's a station off the highway near Ames called Come and Go, with a convenience store attached to the business. When I was done filling up my truck, Jules had gone inside to buy a bag of chips for himself, and I had climbed back inside to grab my wallet, and when I noticed that I was alone with the bucket, it was then that I could see it clearly, that I could stare at it without Jules' jeans in the way, or my need to keep my eyes on the road distracting me. It shone silver from the fluorescent lights of the truck stop, and my eyes once again strained themselves from a brightness that did not seem to exhume. As I placed my hand on the reflective metal, I could feel the heat radiating from the bucket, or from something inside the bucket, and when I touched it, the uncomfortable warmth seemed to fill my entire body. I opened the lid, and inside was just ash. It was grey and dusty. At first, I was simply confused. Why would this person be carrying around ashes in a bucket instead of an urn? It was just strange. I placed my hand on the ash and almost recoiled again. It felt like sand on the beach on a hot summer's day. That nearly unbearable heat. I stared at the ashes for a while, perplexed, like a deer caught in the headlights, but as I stared, I began noticing something emanate from beneath the suit. It was slow and subtle, like watching grass grow or water dry, but I thought I saw something underneath the ashes that was glowing a bright orange. But before I could do anything else, I could hear Jules stop right behind me. I quickly put the lid back on the bucket and turned around. They looked back at me with what looked like a cheerful expression, but their eyes did not match the rest of their expression, and their friendliness fading away into a cold, detached stare. Now I know I said a lot of stuff about most hitchhiking murder stories being a bunch of bullshit, but still, I was fed the same slop as everyone else. And as they looked at me with 100 morbid fantasies of being butchered up on the side of the highway and flooded my mind, I knew it was irrational, but I was scared of them. Jules just stared at me impassively. I asked them what was up with the bucket of ashes. There was no point of hiding it. They said that they were from their grandpa and that they wanted to dump them in her hometown, and that they couldn't afford a proper urn. It was a load of bullshit, and we both knew it. As I gazed back into their eyes, I wondered if they were thinking of killing me, if they were weighing up on my usefulness against what I now know. But as I think back on it now, I wonder if they were just as scared as I was, worried that I would leave them in the middle of the street. Eventually, I decided to just let them back into my truck, pay for the gas, and take them as far as they needed. Because why not? The bucket was strange, but nothing to threaten over. Besides, if they were going to kill me, they might do it quicker if I got onto their good side. We didn't talk for the rest of the trip, and I tried to keep my mind off of whatever was buried underneath that pile of ash. When we finally arrived, they told me to just drop them off on the side of the street. I can't remember which, and I just drove over to the Comfort Inn and never saw them again. That night, sleeping in the motel was awful. I had this horrible nightmare of being caught in a grey sandstorm, choking on the soot and smog around me as a fire blazed into the distance, bathing the landscape in a blinding orange glow. The dream ended as I collapsed onto the ground, letting the dust consume me. The dark sand crushed my lungs, and the heat from the fires melted my bones. I woke up with sweat coating my entire body, in my mouth dry enough to feel like it would crack and split if I opened it wide enough. A glass of water felt like ecstasy as it poured down my throat while I was watching the morning local news from the TV in my room. The top news story was about their local charity shop. Affordables burning down in the early hours before dawn. No bodies were found. There was no reason for me to take note of any of this, but Pennsylvania Avenue, the street right outside of the shop, looked a lot like the street where I dropped Jules off last night. I don't think they burned down that charity shop. I don't think they even had it in them. But how would I know? I only knew them for a couple of hours. I guess I'll never know their story. What happened to them? Maybe they were being hunted by something or someone. Maybe they were hiding something dangerous in that bucket. Or maybe they were just a crazy serial arsonist murderer, keeping the ashes of their victims close wherever they went. But whatever is the truth, how could I know now? I only caught a glance, a sliver of whatever their story was, and I don't think I could learn any more than what I saw. I left Store City to finish my job and stopped again when I was coming home. Why would I? I didn't need to shop. And even if I wanted to learn more, where would I even start? Jews might be dead or worse. But if they're not, how would I even find them? I don't even know their last name. I don't know why I decided to tell my story. I think I'm trying to get something off my chest, or I'm letting the world know about my strange event. Maybe to leave behind a story about how we can never know someone's full story. Or it might be a coincidence, but last night there was a fire at my local grocery shop. The firefighters didn't manage to put it out in time, and the building collapsed in the end. I heard from a friend who used to work at the shop that the place was unsalvageable and they were planning on rebuilding. But the one thing they managed to find in the wreckage was a silver tin bucket, seemingly undamaged from the fire. That same night, I had the same dream from all those years ago, and I woke up choking on ash and soot.